The stone corridor was cold that night. Thomas stood at his post outside the west wing of Kensington Palace, his breath forming small clouds in the December air. He had been a royal guard for 11 years. He knew when to look away. He knew when to pretend he heard nothing. But tonight was different. The clock tower chimed 11. Thomas shifted his weight from one foot to the other. His uniform felt heavier than usual. Through the tall windows behind him, he could see the glow of a single lamp in the drawing room. He was not supposed to be curious. Curiosity was dangerous in his line of work. Then he heard the voices. They were low at first, muffled, two people speaking in urgent whispers. Thomas froze. The drawing room was supposed to be empty. The royal family had retired hours ago, or so he thought. He recognized the first voice immediately. It belonged to Prince Edward, the king's younger brother. Edward was known for his charm and his reckless behavior. The tabloids loved him. The palace staff feared him. The second voice was softer. Female. It took Thomas a moment to place it. Then his stomach dropped. It was Princess Catherine, Edward's sister-in-law, the king's wife. Thomas pressed himself against the wall. His heart hammered in his chest. He should walk away. He should move to another post. But his legs would not obey. If you're enjoying this story, please consider subscribing. We share powerful true stories like this every week. Now, back to what Thomas heard that night. Edward's voice rose slightly. You cannot keep pretending, Catherine. The child is not his. Silence. A long, terrible silence. Thomas felt the blood drain from his face. He gripped his rifle tighter. This was not happening. He was not hearing this. Catherine's voice came next, trembling. Keep your voice down. If anyone hears, the truth comes out, Edward interrupted. And maybe that is what needs to happen. You have been living a lie for 3 years. 3 years. Thomas did a quick calculation in his head. The young prince, Henry, had just turned 3 last month. The entire nation had celebrated. There had been parades, fireworks, a national holiday. Catherine's voice broke. Henry is innocent in all of this? He is just a child. I will not let you destroy his life because you are bitter. Edward laughed, but there was no humor in it. I am trying to save what is left of this family. When the truth comes out, and it will, the scandal will tear the monarchy apart. Better to control it now than let it explode later. Thomas wanted to run. He wanted to unhear every word, but he was rooted to the spot, trapped between duty and the most dangerous secret in England. Catherine was crying now. Soft, desperate sobs. Please, Edward, I am begging you. Do not do this. Not to Henry. Not to your brother. My brother, Edward said coldly, deserves to know his son is not his son. The words hung in the air like poison. Thomas finally moved. He took 3 quiet steps away from the door, his mind racing. He had heard too much. Far too much. In the palace, secrets like this did not stay buried. They leaked. They exploded. They destroyed lives. But who could he tell? And more importantly, should he tell anyone at all? As he reached the end of the corridor, he heard one last thing. Catherine's voice, barely a whisper. If you tell him, I will deny everything, and I will make sure you lose everything you have left. Thomas turned the corner and leaned against the wall, breathing hard. His hands were shaking. Whatever he had just stumbled into, it was bigger than him. Bigger than the palace. Bigger than the crown itself. And now it was part of it. Thomas did not sleep that night. He lay in a small apartment above the guard quarters, staring at the ceiling. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard Catherine's voice. The child is not his. For words that could bring down a kingdom. By morning, Thomas had made a decision. He would say nothing. He would pretend that night never happened. He was a soldier. He followed orders. He did not interfere with royal affairs, but the universe had other plans. 3 days later, Thomas was summoned to the office of Commander Wesley, head of palace security. Wesley was a large man with gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. He had served the royal family for 30 years. Thomas stood at attention in front of the desk. His palms were sweating. Wesley studied him for a long moment. "You were on duty in the West Wing last Tuesday night." It was not a question. Thomas nodded. "Yes, sir." "Did you see or hear anything unusual?" Thomas felt his throat tighten. This was it. The moment that would define the rest of his life. He could lie. He could tell the truth. Both options terrified him. "No, sir," Thomas said. His voice sounded steadier than he felt. It was a quiet night. Wesley leaned back in his chair. He did not look convinced. "Prince Edward filed a complaint. He says someone was listening outside the drawing room, eavesdropping on a private conversation." What? Thomas's heart stopped. Edward knew, or at least he suspected. "I was at my post the entire night," Thomas said carefully. "I heard nothing."
Ow.
Wesley watched him for another long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Good, because if anyone had heard something they should not have, it would put them in a very dangerous position. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir. You are dismissed." Thomas left the office on shaking legs. He had just lied to his commanding officer. He had chosen a side without meaning to, and now there was no going back. Over the next week, Thomas noticed changes. Small things. Catherine stopped attending public events. The king looked tired and distracted. Edward was nowhere to be seen. The palace felt like a house holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. Then, on a gray Saturday morning, everything changed. Thomas was in the guard break room when the news broke. One of the younger guards rushed in holding his phone. "You have to see this." The screen showed a headline from the Daily Chronicle, the biggest tabloid in England. The words made Thomas's blood run cold. "Royal scandal. Palace source claims Prince Henry's paternity in question." The article was vague. It cited unnamed sources. It made no direct accusations. But the damage was done. Within hours, every news outlet in the world was reporting the story. Social media exploded. The palace gates were swarmed with reporters. Thomas felt sick. Someone had talked, but who? That afternoon, an emergency meeting was called for all palace staff. They gathered in the main hall. Commander Wesley stood at the front, his face grim. "By now, you have all seen the news," Wesley said. His voice echoed off the marble walls. "I want to be very clear. Anyone found leaking information to the press will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. This is not a threat. It is a promise." Thomas kept his eyes forward. His mind was racing. He had not told anyone. He was certain of that. So who had leaked the story? As the meeting ended, Thomas felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned. It was Marcus, another guard who worked the West Wing. Marcus was older, close to retirement. They had worked together for years. "We need to talk," Marcus said quietly. "Not here." They met an hour later in a small pub 3 blocks from the palace. Marcus ordered 2 beers, but did not drink his. He looked nervous. I know you were there that night," Marcus said. "In the West Corridor. I saw you." Thomas felt his stomach drop. "I do not know what you mean. Do not lie to me." Marcus leaned forward. "I was doing rounds. I saw you outside the drawing room. I saw your face when you walked away." "You heard something?" Thomas said nothing. Marcus sighed. "Look, I am not here to turn you in, but you need to know something. The leak did not come from you. It came from someone much closer to the family. Someone who wants this secret out in the open, who, I do not know for sure, but I have my suspicions." Marcus glanced around the pub, then lowered his voice. "Prince Edward has been meeting with a journalist. I have seen them twice, at a hotel in Westminster." Thomas felt everything click into place. Edward had not been trying to protect the family. He had been trying to destroy it. He wanted the truth exposed. He wanted his brother humiliated, but why? "There is something else," Marcus said. "The king has ordered a private investigation. They are looking for the source of the leak, and they are starting with the guards." Thomas felt the walls closing in. "What should I do?" Marcus finished his beer and stood up. "Keep your head down. Say nothing. And pray they do not figure out you were there that night." As Thomas walked back to the palace through the cold London streets, he realized something. This was no longer just about a secret. It was about power, betrayal, revenge, and he was caught in the middle of a war he never asked to fight. The investigation began the next morning. 2 men in dark suits arrived at the palace. They were from the Royal Protection Command, the elite unit that handled internal security threats. They interviewed guards one by one behind closed doors. No one knew what questions they were asking. No one knew who was under suspicion. Thomas tried to stay calm. He went about his duties. He kept his head down, just like Marcus had advised. But every time a door opened, every time someone said his name, his heart raced. On the 3rd day, they called him in. The room was small and windowless. The 2 investigators sat across from him at a metal table. One was tall with gray eyes. The other was shorter, with a beard and a tablet in his hands. "Thomas Harrington," the tall one said. "You have been with the Royal Guard for 11 years. Excellent record. No complaints." "8." Thomas nodded. "Yes, sir. You were on duty in the West Wing on December 3rd. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir." The bearded investigator tapped his tablet. "You logged your position at 2300 hours? But there is a gap in the security footage from that corridor. Nearly 15 minutes. Thomas felt sweat form on his back. "I was not aware of that." "The cameras were disabled," the tall investigator said. "Manually. Someone with access to the system shut them down." Moses's mind raced. He had not touched the cameras. He did not even know how. But someone had. Someone who knew he would be there.
"I did my rounds as scheduled,"
Thomas said carefully. "I saw nothing unusual." The bearded investigator leaned forward. "Did you see or speak with any members of the royal family that night?" "No. Did you hear anything? Voices? Movement?" Thomas hesitated for half a second. It was enough. The tall investigator's eyes sharpened. "Mr. Harrington, I need you to understand something. We are not trying to ruin your life. We are trying to protect the crown. If you heard something that night, if you know something, now is the time to speak. Loyalty is important, but so is truth." Thomas looked at the table. He thought about Catherine. About young Prince Henry, who was only 3 years old. About Edward, who seemed determined to burn everything down. About the king, who might not even know the truth about his own son. "I heard nothing," Thomas said quietly. "I swear it." The investigators exchanged a glance. The tall one nodded slowly. "You can go, but do not leave London. We may need to speak with you again." Thomas left the room on unsteady legs. As he walked down the hallway, he nearly collided with someone. He looked up. It was Princess Catherine. She was thinner than he remembered. Her face was pale, and there were dark circles under her eyes. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then Catherine spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." Before Thomas could respond, she was gone, swept away by 2 attendants. She knew. Somehow she knew he had kept her secret. That night, Thomas could not stop thinking about it. He had protected a lie that could destroy a child's life if it ever came out. But what was the alternative? To expose the truth and watch the monarchy crumble? To see a 3-year-old boy branded as illegitimate? He did not have answers. Only questions. 2 days later, the palace made an official statement. The king appeared on television, standing beside Catherine. He looked tired but resolute. Catherine held his hand. "There's been much speculation in recent days," the king said. His voice was firm. "I want to address these rumors directly. My wife and I have been the subject of false accusations. Our son, Prince Henry, is my son. Any suggestion otherwise is a lie. We will be taking legal action against those who have spread these falsehoods." The camera flashed to Catherine. She looked directly into the lens, her expression calm. "Our family is strong. We will not be broken by gossip." Thomas watched from his apartment. It was a performance, a carefully crafted denial. But was it the truth? Or just another layer of deception? The next morning, Thomas arrived at the palace to find it surrounded by protesters. Some held signs supporting the king. Others demanded transparency. The whole situation was spiraling out of control. Inside, the mood was tense. Guards spoke in whispers. Staff moved quickly, eyes down. Everyone could feel it. Something was about to break. Thomas was on duty in the east courtyard when he saw Edward. The prince was walking alone, hands in his pockets, head down. He looked defeated, broken for a moment. Thomas felt something unexpected. Pity. Whatever Edward had been trying to do, it had failed. The palace had closed ranks. The lie had been protected, and Edward was on the outside. But as Thomas watched the prince disappear into the shadows, he realized something. This was not over. Edward was not the type to give up. He was planning something, waiting for the right moment. And when that moment came, explosion would be bigger than anyone imagined. That night, Thomas made a decision. He could not keep running from this. He needed to know the truth, not for the palace, not for the crown, but for himself. Because he had chosen a side without understanding what side he was on, he needed to find out who Prince Henry's real father was. And more importantly, he needed to understand why Edward was so desperate to expose it. Thomas started digging carefully. He could not ask questions directly. That would raise suspicion. Instead, he listened. He watched. He pieced together fragments of conversations, old gossip, forgotten rumors. The palace was full of people who had been there for decades. Housekeepers, cooks, gardeners. They saw everything. They remembered everything. And if you knew how to ask, they talked. Thomas started with Margaret, a housekeeper who had worked in the royal apartments for 25 years. She was in her 60s, sharp-eyed and sharp-tongued. She had seen 4 generations of royals come and go. He found her in the linen room, folding sheets. "Margaret," he said casually, "can I ask you something?" She looked up, suspicious. "Depends what you are asking." Prince Edward and Princess Catherine, were they ever close? Margaret's hands stopped moving. She studied him for a long moment. "Why do you want to know?" "Just curious." "The way things have been lately." Margaret sighed and set down the sheet. "They were very close once. 4 years ago, maybe 5. Before Catherine married the king. Edward was different back then. Happier. He and Catherine spent a lot of time together. Too much time, some people said." Thomas felt his pulse quicken. "What happened?" "The king happened." Margaret picked up another sheet. "He wanted Catherine. And what the king wants, the king gets." Edward stepped aside. He had no choice. But something broke in him after that. He started drinking, gambling, getting into trouble. "Do you think he loved her?" Margaret gave him a sharp look. "I think he still does. And I think that is his curse." Now, Thomas left the linen room with his mind racing. The pieces were starting to fit together. Edward had loved Catherine. He had lost her to his older brother. And now he was watching her live a lie, raising a child that might not belong to the man she married. But who was the father? If not the king, then who? Thomas spent the next 2 days gathering more information. He talked to the palace physician's assistant, who mentioned that Catherine had been ill during her early pregnancy. He spoke with a driver who remembered taking Catherine to a private clinic outside London, alone, 4 years ago. He listened to the kitchen staff gossip about how Catherine had insisted on spending time at her family estate right before she announced her pregnancy. Everything pointed to a secret, but the identity of the father remained a mystery. Then, late one night, Thomas found something. He was doing a routine check of the security archives, looking through old footage for another investigation. He stumbled across recordings from 4 years ago. From the summer before Catherine's wedding, there was a clip from the garden cameras. It showed Catherine and Edward sitting together on a bench. They were talking. Then Edward reached out and took her hand. Catherine leaned her head on his shoulder. Thomas's breath caught. It was tender, intimate. The gesture of 2 people who shared something deeper than friendship. He kept watching. The next clip showed them walking together at dusk, arms around each other. Another showed them laughing. Edward spinning Catherine around like they were dancing. Thomas sat back in his chair, his heart pounding. Edward was not just protecting a secret. He was protecting his own secret. Prince Henry was not the king's son. He was Edward's son. Thomas felt the weight of it settle over him like a stone. This was not just a scandal. This was treason. Catherine had deceived the king. She had passed off Edward's child as the heir to the throne. And Edward had stayed silent, watching his own son grow up calling another man father. But why had Edward suddenly decided to expose the truth? What had changed? Thomas needed answers, and there was only one person who could give them to him. He waited until late evening, when the palace was quiet. Then he went to Edward's private residence, a small apartment in the north wing. He had no plan, no strategy. He only knew he could not live with this secret anymore. Edward answered the door on the third knock. He was in casual clothes, holding a glass of whiskey. He looked surprised to see Thomas. "Can I help you?" Edward asked, his tone cold. Thomas took a breath. "I need to talk to you. About that night. About what I heard." Edward's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. He stepped aside. "Come in." The apartment was small and cluttered. Books piled on tables, empty bottles on the counter. It looked like the home of a man who had stopped caring. Edward poured himself another drink, but did not offer one to Thomas. "So, you were listening." "I did not mean to, but you did." Edward sat down heavily on the couch. "And now you want answers. Or maybe you want to blackmail me. Which is it?" "Neither," Thomas said. "I just want to understand. Why now? Why expose this now?" Edward laughed bitterly. "Because I am tired. Tired of watching her pretend. Tired of watching my brother raise my son. Tired of being the family disgrace while she plays the perfect princess. You could have said something years ago. And destroy her? Destroy Henry." Edward shook his head. "I loved her too much. I still do. But I cannot keep living like this. Every time I see Henry, I see myself. Every time he calls my brother father, it feels like a knife. I thought if the truth came out, maybe we could start over. Maybe I could finally be his father." Thomas sat down across from him. "That is not how it works. If the truth comes out, Henry loses everything. His title, his future, his identity. You would not be saving him. You would be destroying him." Edward's face crumpled. For a moment, he looked like a broken man. "Then what am I supposed to do? Just keep pretending? Keep watching from the sidelines?" "Yes," Thomas said quietly, "because that is what love means. Sacrifice." Edward stared at him for a long moment. Then he drained his glass and stood up. "You should go. Before someone sees you here." Thomas stood as well. "What are you going to do?" Edward did not answer. He just walked to the window and stared out at the dark palace grounds. As Thomas left the apartment, he felt a strange sense of relief. He had finally understood. This was not about revenge. It was about pain. Edward was not trying to destroy the monarchy. He was trying to stop hurting. But Thomas also knew something else. Edward was unpredictable, desperate, and desperate men did dangerous things. The question was not if Edward would act again. It was when 3 weeks passed without incident, the media frenzy began to die down. The palace announced that legal action was being taken against the tabloids that published the paternity rumors. Several journalists were served with lawsuits. The message was clear. The crown would not tolerate attacks on the royal family. Thomas hoped it was over. He hoped Edward had listened. He hoped the secret would stay buried. But deep down, he knew better. On a cold January morning, Thomas was assigned to escort Prince Henry to his preschool. It was a routine duty. The young prince was bright and cheerful, always asking questions. He reminded Thomas of Edward in the old photographs he had seen. The same curious eyes, the same quick smile. As Thomas helped Henry into the car, the boy looked up at him. "Do you know my Uncle Edward?" Thomas felt his chest tighten. "Yes, Your Highness, I do. I miss him. He used to visit all the time. But he does not come anymore." Thomas did not know what to say. He just nodded and closed the car door. That afternoon, everything changed. Thomas was in the guard station when Commander Wesley burst in, his face pale. "Turn on the news, now." Someone switched on the television. The screen showed a live press conference, and standing at the podium, looking directly into the camera, was Prince Edward. Thomas felt his stomach drop. Edward looked composed, determined. He was wearing a dark suit and tie. Behind him stood a lawyer and a woman Thomas recognized as a prominent journalist. "Good afternoon," Edward began. His voice was steady. "I am here today to make a statement regarding recent allegations about the royal family. Allegations that I can no longer, in good conscience, allow to be dismissed as lies." Thomas could not breathe. 4 years ago, I began a relationship with Catherine Ashford, who would later become my brother's wife. That relationship continued until shortly before her wedding. The child known as Prince Henry is not my brother's son. He is mine. The room erupted. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. But Edward continued, his voice rising above the chaos. "I have remained silent for 3 years to protect my son and the woman I love. But silence has become complicity. The truth must be known. I am prepared to submit to DNA testing. I am prepared to face any consequences. But I will not allow my son to live his life built on a lie." The broadcast cut to the studio, where anchors sat in stunned silence. Then the speculation began, the analysis, the shock. Thomas stared at the screen, his mind reeling. Edward had done it. He had actually done it. Within minutes, the palace was in chaos. Staff ran in every direction. Security doubled. The king was in emergency meetings with advisors. Catherine had locked herself in her private chambers. Thomas stood in the courtyard, watching it all unfold. He felt numb. He had tried to stop this. He had tried to make Edward understand. But some men could not be saved from themselves. That evening, the king made his own statement. He appeared on television alone. His face was hard as stone. "Prince Edward has made serious accusations today. Accusations that are not only false but deeply damaging to the crown and to my family. I want to be absolutely clear. Prince Henry is my son. I will not dignify these lies with further comment. Prince Edward has been stripped of his royal duties and his titles, effective immediately.
Ow.
It was a declaration of war. Brother against brother. The family was tearing itself apart in front of the entire world. For the next 48 hours, the palace was under siege. Protesters gathered outside the gates. Some supported Edward, calling him brave. Others condemned him as a traitor. The media ran constant coverage. Experts debated constitutional law. Historians discussed past royal scandals. And, in the middle of it all, was a 3-year-old boy who did not understand why his world was falling apart. Thomas was assigned to guard the family quarters during this time. He saw Catherine only once, walking through the hallway with red eyes and trembling hands. She looked like a ghost. He saw the king pacing in his study, surrounded by lawyers and advisors. The man looked 10 years older than he had a month ago, but he did not see Prince Henry. The boy had been kept away from everything. Sheltered in a separate wing of the palace with his nanny. On the 3rd day, Thomas was called to Commander Wesley's office again. This time, Marcus was there too. Both guards stood at attention. Wesley looked exhausted. "Gentlemen, I need to ask you something, and I need complete honesty. Did either of you know about Prince Edward's claims before today?" Thomas felt his heart race. This was it. The moment of truth. Marcus spoke first. "No, sir. I had no knowledge." Wesley turned to Thomas. "And you?" Thomas thought about everything he had learned, everything he had seen, the conversation he had overheard, the footage he had found, the confrontation with Edward. He could tell the truth. He could confess that he had known, that he had kept the secret, that he had even tried to stop Edward from going public. But what good would it do now? The damage was done. The truth was out. And Thomas had already chosen his side. "No, sir," Thomas said. "I knew nothing." Wesley studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Good, because the investigation is expanding. They are looking for anyone who might have helped Prince Edward prepare his statement. Anyone who had knowledge and did not report it will face charges. Thomas left the office with his hands shaking. He had lied again. And this time, there might be consequences. As he walked through the palace corridors, he passed a portrait of the royal family. The king, Catherine, and young Prince Henry, all smiling. It had been painted just 6 months ago. Thomas wondered how long it would stay on the wall. He wondered if any of them would ever smile like that again, and he wondered if he had made the right choice, or if he had simply delayed the inevitable. The DNA test results were scheduled to be released in 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks felt like years. The palace had become a fortress. Armed guards at every entrance, metal detectors, background checks for anyone entering the grounds. The royal family had retreated from public life entirely. No appearances, no statements. Just silence. Thomas moved through his days like a man underwater. Everything felt distant and muffled. He did his job. He followed orders. But inside, he was falling apart. He kept thinking about Prince Henry. The boy was old enough to sense something was wrong. Old enough to feel the tension in every room he entered, but too young to understand that his entire life hung in the balance of a medical test. On the 10th day, Thomas encountered Edward again. It was late at night near the East Gardens. Edward was sitting on a bench, alone, smoking a cigarette. Thomas almost walked away, but something made him stop. "You got what you wanted?" Thomas said quietly. Edward looked up. He seemed surprised, then resigned. "Did I? Because from where I am sitting, I have lost everything." "Chose this?" "No." Edward shook his head. "I chose honesty. There is a difference." Thomas sat down beside him against every protocol. "You chose to hurt people. Your brother, Catherine? Henry, that is not honesty. That is selfishness." Edward was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was broken. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought the truth would set us all free. But all I have done is made everything worse. Catherine will not speak to me. My brother wants me arrested. And Henry will grow up knowing I destroyed his family. He will grow up knowing you are his father. Is that not what you wanted?" "I wanted to be in his life. I wanted to matter to him. Instead, I am the villain in his story." Edward crushed the cigarette under his shoe. "I would take it all back if I could. Every word, every moment. But I cannot." Thomas felt an unexpected wave of sympathy. "What will you do when the results come back?" "If they prove I am right, I will try to be the father Henry deserves. If they prove I am wrong, I will disappear. Leave England. Start over somewhere no one knows my name. And if you are right, do you really think Catherine will let you near him?" Edward's face crumpled. "I do not know, but I have to try. He is my son. I cannot just walk away." Thomas stood up. "Then you had better be ready for whatever comes. Because if those results say what you think they will, this family will never be the same." As Thomas walked away, he heard Edward call after him. "You were there that night, in the corridor." "I saw you." Thomas stopped but did not turn around. "Thank you," Edward said, "for not saying anything, for giving me time." Thomas did not respond. He just kept walking. The night before the results were to be released, Thomas could not sleep. He lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. A whispered conversation, a secret kept, a choice made. Had he done the right thing? He had tried to protect people. He had tried to stop the explosion. But in the end, he had only delayed it. And now, everyone would pay the price. The next morning, the palace was silent as a tomb. Thomas reported for duty at dawn. The halls were empty. No staff, no movement. Just the heavy weight of anticipation. At 10 o'clock, the king's private secretary appeared. He gathered the senior staff in the main hall. His face revealed nothing. "The test results have been received," he said. "The family's reviewing them now. A public statement will be made this afternoon. That was all. No details. No hints. The hours crawled by. Thomas stood at his post, barely breathing. Around him, other guards shifted nervously. Everyone knew. This was the moment that would define the future of the monarchy. At 3 o'clock, the king appeared on television. He stood alone in his office. No Catherine, no advisors. Just him. Thomas watched on a small screen in the guard station. His heart was in his throat. "Good afternoon," the king began. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed his pain. 3 weeks ago, my brother made a public accusation that questioned the legitimacy of my son, Prince Henry. Today, I can confirm that DNA testing has been completed. He paused. The world held its breath. The results show that Prince Henry is not my biological son. The room spun. Thomas grabbed the edge of the table to steady himself. The king continued, his voice breaking slightly. This news is devastating to my family. But I want to be clear about something. Henry is my son in every way that matters. I have raised him. I have loved him. And I will continue to do so regardless of biology. He looked directly into the camera. I am also announcing that I will be stepping down as king, effective immediately. This institution is built on tradition and legitimacy. I cannot, in good conscience, remain on the throne under these circumstances. Thomas felt tears sting his eyes. The king was sacrificing everything. His crown, his legacy, his future. All for a child who was not even his by blood. As for my brother, the king said, his voice hardening, he has destroyed this family in his quest for truth. I hope it was worth it. The broadcast ended. For a moment, no one in the guard station moved. Then someone whispered, "What happens now?" No one had an answer. Over the next few days, the world watched as the British monarchy entered its greatest crisis in centuries. The king abdicated. Catherine released a statement, apologizing to the nation. Edward issued his own statement, expressing regret, but standing by his decision. And through it all, Thomas carried his secret. He had been there at the beginning. He had heard the first whisper of the truth, and he had chosen silence. Had it been the right choice? He would never know. 1 week later, Thomas was walking through the gardens when he saw someone sitting on a bench. It was Catherine. She was alone, something that almost never happened. She looked up as he approached. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "I never thanked you properly," Catherine said softly. "For what you did. For not telling anyone what you heard that night." Thomas shook his head. "I did not do it for thanks. I did it because it seemed like the right thing." Was it? Thomas thought about that. He thought about the king who had lost his throne. About Edward, who had lost his family. About Henry, who would grow up knowing he was the child who broke a kingdom. "I do not know," Thomas admitted. "Maybe there was no right choice. Maybe some secrets are too big to keep and too dangerous to tell." Catherine nodded slowly. "I live with that truth every day." She stood and walked away, leaving Thomas alone in the garden as the sun set over the palace. Thomas thought about the guard he used to be, the man who followed orders and asked no questions. That man was gone. This version of Thomas understood that sometimes the hardest choices were not between right and wrong. They were between two wrongs. And all you could do was choose the one you could live with. He had kept a secret that destroyed a family. But he had also protected a child from pain, at least for a little while longer. Was it worth it? Thomas looked up at the palace, at the windows where Henry was probably sleeping. Innocent and unaware of the storm his existence had created, and he decided that maybe, just maybe it had been, because some truths were too cruel to speak, and some lies were too necessary to confess. The guard who overheard a whisper had made his choice, and now he would live with it for the rest of his life.